Hello there and welcome. I'm Ole Brøger, and if you're new here, I really hope I'll earn your subscription today. Today I'm going to build a botanic house, and there will be a greenhouse next to it. It has to be totally overgrown and abandoned. Maybe abandoned or maybe not. Maybe some new visitors have moved in. I just have one issue here. I'm on a very tight schedule. I have a DnD session on Sunday where I'm going to use this build. And I just started a new job, so I only have a few nights and evenings available and maybe one full Saturday. I got a lot of stuff to do. We better get started. First, I will start making a layout for the basement. I'm using some of the Army Painter's Game Master set's foam. I still have a couple of sheets in stock and I might as well use them for this. I want to build this fast because I don't have much time, but I still want it to be some sort of modular. And I'm using this foam for the basement because it is the only part of this build that is probably going to be reusable in other setups. The rest of the builds, not so much. I will make a 1-inch grid all over the basement, and I found out that my players actually like having a grid. There is other ways to measure distances and other stuff in Dungeons & Dragons, but now I'm making this a bit modular and reusable. I will make a 1-inch grid on this one. I'm scorching it with my hobby knife, and then I will highlight all the scorchings with a dull pencil. And this is actually the most time consuming in this build, but since I'm reusing it, I think it's worth it. I'm using my good old friend, Mr. Rock, to make some texture into the tiles. And this will speed up the process of this build a lot. I have all these leftover walls from my temple build, and it will save me a lot of time, and I think this texture is awesome. The stones in the walls are actually engraved on my laser cutter, but I just need to cut them all in half to make sure that I have enough walls. There will only be one side of the walls visible in this basement anyway, so this is perfect. To make some section in the walls, I'm using this 5x5mm wooden dowels made out of balsa wood. It's very easy to work with, and it has this nice wooden texture since it is wood. I'm just assembling everything with some hot glue, and then we have some nice walls for a basement. Now I just need to figure out where I'm going to embed it into the big piece of pink foam I have. And I want it to be in a slight angle on this property, if you can call it that, because there will be some green stuff all around the house. This base will also be a permanent thing for the future builds that I'm going to build on top of this basement. And this piece of foam is way too big to fit into my proxon, so I had to use a big hobby knife to cut out the foundation for this basement. It was not the best cut, but it worked. And then I used some hot glue to attach the surrounding pieces that I had cut off. For the ground level floor, I'm just using some foam core board. This is a 3mm foam core, and I will just cut out a shape that fits the size of the basement so I can cover everything up. And then I'll just make a 1-to-1 copy of that so I have the same shape for the second floor. I'll also cut out some pieces for the roof. I'll make some markings on just eyeballing where do I want windows and doors, and then I could make some walls. I've cut out some strips of foam core, and they are 5 centimeters tall. That's approximately 2 inches. I've started making a system for windows and doors, and I will come up with a YouTube video later this year where I will walk through the design process, pros and cons, and how I cut them out with my laser. I have some of the windows here, and I'm gonna use them in this build. These are actually just some of my prototypes. I will refine the process a bit better, but they will work perfectly for this purpose. And the same thing goes for these doors. I'm actually quite happy about how they turned out, and I will have them in the same video. Day 1, or actually evening 1, is almost done. I spent almost 4 hours making all these cutouts. And of course the basement too. This is day 2, and here is my stair system, which will also be in that future video. I got the idea for these during the build of my airship, and yes, I know I am being a bit late with that part 4 video of the airship, but it will be up next week. I'll use the same type of balsa wood dowels on the corners on the house, and I will just hot glue all the walls in. On the windows I will actually use PVA glue, because hot glue is such a pain to get the access off. And the windows, they almost press fit in, so I don't need anything to keep them there. And finally, I can attach the last inner wall on the second floor. I expect the boss fight will take place in the basement. I have this tree that is alive and it's growing all the way up through the building. So I need a hole in the floor. And I will attach some broken coffee stir sticks in the bottom of the floor, just to give an idea of some broken floor planks. Then I need to put in some more windows. On the outside of the building, I'll need to put in some half timber, and I will start using some coffee stir sticks to hide this ugly part of the floor. Some more coffee stir sticks around the windows, and I'm still using hot glue because this is a speed build and I'm probably only going to use this building once, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It just have to give an illusion for the players that you are in an overgrown old house. I installed all the windows and half timber before I primed it, and usually I would have done that after the prime so I could keep the natural look of the wood. However, I don't want to install the doors before priming because I want to be in control of where the paint goes, and I don't want to fight the stock doors if there's paint on them. I want them to be able to open and close. This blue foam is 10 mm thick, and I want some stones all around the foundation of the building, and they will have to be 5 mm tall. So I'll just cut some 10 by 5 mm strips. And this blue foam is some of the best I've ever worked with. It's so easy to make texture into it, and I don't need to use a hobby knife to cut before I'm using a pencil. I can just draw the texture directly into the foam, and it's very easy and fast. And instead of doing one strip at a time, I just laid out a lot of strips next to each other and drew in all the lines to speed up the process even further. And of course, I also textured it with Mr. Rock. And again, hot glue was my friend. I could just glue in one strip at a time, and it was very fast. To make some stucco texture on the walls, I'm using some very fine sand. And in previous videos, I told you I hate plaster. This is not a plaster. It is some kind of a plaster, but it is another product. It won't dry up as fast, but it's still the same mess I'm getting when I'm using plaster. The advantage of this stuff is that you can make a very thick layer of it. I'm not gonna need that right now, but it has the properties of that. I can make a 2 centimeter layer that's almost 3/4 of an inch. It's a very thick layer you can build up with this stuff, and it's still very cheap. I mixed it 50-50 with the fine sand, and I will apply it in a very thin layer because the paint will do the rest. I just want this stucco texture. And now it's time for me to go to bed, and this is the end of my day 2 on this build. The base for this build will be reusable in other scenarios, so I want it to look nice around the foundation of any house that will be on this premises. I used a roller on some of my good, very thin 3 mm foam, to make some cobblestones that will form a courtyard in front of the house. I'll also need some texture that will look like dirt on the rest of the build. I made a mix of the drywall filler and some sand, this time a bit thicker than I used on the stucco, and then I just spread it out all over the ground. And after it had been sitting for 10 minutes, I started to smooth everything out just using some water. I also used some sand to make a gravel path to the backyard. And the rest of the ground just got a light sprinkle. Now I just need to assemble the roof. I already cut out the parts, so they should fit on top of the house. I also had a lot of these roof shingle strips that I cut out on my laser cutter. I did that way back and it was very nice to have them in stock. Now I just need to assemble that roof. I'm using the same procedure. I used some coffee stir sticks as half timber and I mixed up a new batch of stucco. Finally, I just need to glue in all these roof shingles. And instead of using individual shingles, I'm so happy that I made this system for making roof shingles because it is a lot faster to install and glue in. And both rooftops with shingles took me only an hour to make. Now I just need to cut a hole in the roof where this tree that's growing all the way through the house will penetrate all the shingles. I cut out some 1 by 1 inch rooftop shingles and I didn't use much measurement. It was just eyeballing and folding the paper, cutting them into pieces and glue them in. I used some Game Master foam safe spray from the Army Painter all over the model that I have built. Building, roof, and of course the base plate for the house. I mixed up a lot of paints. I used some Vallejo base primer and some craft paint. I need a very bright beige for the stucco and I need a wooden look. This is going to be a very sloppy paint job and no layering and color matching and all that stuff. I just need to get some color on this house. All the doors I already cut weeks ago, but I needed to paint them and I used some dark wood speed paint. Speed paint directly on wood sucks up a lot of paint, but it works and it makes it possible to see all the texture and grains through the paint. I already had an idea that I was going to make this build and about a month ago I already made the design of a greenhouse with doors, so it was just cutting it out on the laser and assemble it. The design was not as strong as I thought, so I strengthened it with some wooden dowels and some coffee stir sticks. The paint on the doors are now dry and I can glue them in. They press fit very good, but unfortunately I got a lot of glue on some of the doors and had to wipe it off. But in the end, all the doors were installed and I got a minimum of glue so they will still be able to open and close. I used a light gray mixed with some Israeli tan from Vallejo and I dry brushed the full roof. I also used the dark wood speed paint all over the greenhouse as the only color. I primed the base in 2 different colors. I used the ruins and cliffs for all the stonework and a mix of wilderness and woodland and the dungeon and subterranean for the rest of the grounds. I used a light grey crafting paint mixed with some desert sand from Vallejo and I just dry brushed directly on top of the primer where everything was supposed to be stone. I used a mix of desert yellow and Israel sand primer from Vallejo to dry brush the rest of the ground. And now to my biggest mistake. I used this quick shade Dip It from the Army Painter and it works quite well on miniatures and directly on wood. But on top of foam, it turns out so glossy. And later I had to dry brush everything over and almost repaint all the stonework. It worked pretty well on top of what was the ground thing and no smooth surfaces. And I'm quite satisfied how that turned out. It gave the look of wet soil and that was actually what I needed for this build. And while the quick shade was still wet, I started to use some basing material. Here I have some leaves And then I applied a lot of basing glue. I put on some grass, other types of flocking, until I was satisfied with how everything looked. I also put some leaves and flocking on top of the roof just to make it look like it haven't been maintained for years. And finally, the quickshade was so dry that I could make some dry brushing on top of it to make all that glossy effect go away. It's almost midnight and I'm starting to get very tired, but there's still a few things I need to be done, like gluing in the basement doors and mounting the stairs. And before I go to bed after 7.5 hours of work, I need to make some vines or something that will look like tentacle vines. And for this, I'm using some hemp thread. I cut out a lot of it. I mixed some glue and brown paint. It was looking too bright, so I mixed in some black paint and that worked. And then it got very messy. I pulled all the hemp thread through the paint and glue and put them on top of my silicone mat. The silicone mat won't stick to the paint, so they should be very easy to get off. I had some flocking and sprinkled it directly all over the painted stuff. Now it just needs to dry overnight and I can continue my work in the morning. This is the last day of working. My players are arriving tomorrow. And I think these vines turned out great. They are dry, they are stiff, and I think they will be pretty easy to shape and work with. And we will get back to those later. Right now, we need to put in some interior, flooring, and wallpaper. I found some cool flooring pictures and I printed them out in a size that were actually 1-inch tiles. And I'll just cut them out, glue them in with some glue stick, and then we have a floor. For the floors, I would usually use coffee stir sticks, but I don't have time to glue in so many coffee stir sticks for these floors. And since this house is going to be a one-time use only maybe, I don't want to put too much effort in it. I just want it to look good. I also found some cool pictures of 16th century wallpaper. And I found some dark wood planks. I combined these in the height that I needed, and then I have something for the walls. And this is the same procedure, glue stick, and then I needed to cut out the holes for the windows and the doors. There was a lot of cut marks and it left some visible white paper. And then I just used some of the brown darkwood speed paint to cover up all the white. And as you can see, I also used some paper tiles for the stone floor in the kitchen area. And I actually think this starts to look pretty good. I might use this method in the future for some other speed builds, because it is effective, fast, and it gives a good visual effect. And now I need to make that tree monster that living in the basement and growing a tree all the way through the floors and the roof. This is one of the leftover bases I used last week for some scatter terrain. I also 3D printed a monster. This is a wine blight and I'm going to build that into the tree. I want this to be removable since I'm going to use this basement and base for other builds, so it needs to be clean and empty. I also have some leftover of these tree stumps. This is from the same branch that I used for scatter terrain. And these are cut to size so they will fit in the heights of each level in the house. The base from last week's build was a bit too small, so I just had a new one laying around that was a bit bigger. I drilled a hole into it and then I will be able to put in a screw, sanding down the wine blight with my rotary tool to make it fit a tiny tree stump that I will put below it. It is already painted. I just made a sloppy paint job with some brown speed paint and the tiny tree stump was glued in with some super glue, and then we can put the wine blight on top of it. And now I can use some of the vines. These are going to be some tentacles from this vine blind. The branch, it broke because of that screw, but there's nothing super glue can't help you with that situation. And I am under a bit of time pressure here. Usually I would have used some white glue, but it is super glue and glued fingers to attach all these vines. To give it some texture and color at the same time, I will just splash on some of this Vallejo mud texture. And finally, to darken the tree stump, I will use some dark wood speed paint on top of it. And the vine blind tree monster is done. Now I just need to put all these tentacles through the doors so they will be ready to capture some human food. On the first floor, I mounted another tree stump that would fit the height of the walls. And then it was just all over again, putting in some vines, and this time I would actually just glue them to the floor. I also laser cut some tables and other furniture, and I want these vines to be twisted all around the furniture so you get a feel that they really got a grab on this house. So I pulled out some of the vines through the windows and glued them to the walls. I did the same thing on the second floor, but I also needed some carpets. I found some real pictures of carpets, printed them out and put them in with a glue stick all over the house where I thought they would fit. And a long time ago I made a lot of different kinds of beds, and I thought, okay, I'll sacrifice this and just glue it in so I could attach the vines to it. I actually spent some hours attaching all these vines all over the house and even through the roof. I lost some footage about mounting the tree stump to the top of the roof, but I think you will get the idea. Last week I used some of these awful trees that I got very cheap, but this time I thought, okay, this might work, drilling some holes and attach them to the tree stump. I cut some of the trunk of these trees before I glued them in, and attaching some vines to it, it's kind of looked okay, but I still think they were missing something. Soft and colored reindeer moss. This works and it's quick and dirty, and I can just glue it on top of these ugly branches and they will cover everything up. And of course more vines are needed. I glued a lot of vines on top of the roof. And the greenhouse would also be entangled into the vines. Some more carpeting around the house. Now I just needed to set everything up. I have 3D printed a lot of miniatures and painted some scatter terrain. I reused a lot of the furniture I already had. I used some plants from the temple build, the flower beds, and I had a lot of scatter terrain that I could already use. I also needed a type of fog of war, so I cut out a piece of cardboard and put it in to cover each room. I made it in time and we had a blast of a game. I'm so happy about how all this turned out, and it worked perfectly. The house itself, I don't think I'm gonna use that again, but I will save it and maybe something will come up. But this base plate for the house and the basement, that will be a very good platform in the future where I can build other houses. And now I have all this scattered terrain. It will be pretty easy for me to build a house fast. If it's one-time use or reusable, it doesn't matter, I can still do it pretty fast. But let's have a closer look on how this actually turned out inside. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. I really appreciate you all being here, and next week we are going to look at the airship. And if you already haven't done it, please hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below, give me a thumbs up, and I will see you soon. Goodbye for now.